And we're live on YouTube.
All right, welcome everyone to the Q&A with coders session, speaking about common problems coders encounter and how we overcome them. I'm Matt Lloyd-Jones. I'll be the chair in this session, and I'll let the coders introduce themselves. So Matt Granger first.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Granger, a researcher at the NINA, which is the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research in Trondheim. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Kaitlyn here. I'm a postdoc at the University of Edinburgh with the Camerades group.
And I'll go last. So my name's Chris Pritchard. I'm a senior lecturer at Nottingham-Trent University.
All right, yeah, so just to remind you, the session's on common problems coders encounter and how they overcome them. So to start you off, I've got a question. What is the most common problem you encounter when writing code? Maybe.
I guess I've got one. Is silly things like missing commas, semicolons, or brackets. Is probably my favorite one, and I think with R and particularly with Shiny, you can very easily miss a comma, and then it gives you a very cryptic looking error message, and you have to kind of trawl your way through trying to work out where this missing comma is. And for other languages, it can be similar. So Python's very sensitive to spaces, for example. So yeah, it's kind of syntaxy things, I think, are my big bugbear.
Maybe Kaitlyn next.
I think honestly, yeah, it's like the exact same problem where it's silly syntax things. Also in R, I guess when to quote and when not to quote sometimes isn't that clear. In different functions, and yeah, just getting things round the wrong way. Also the equal sign. For some reason, I always just put one equal sign, even though for most things, when you're evaluating, it's two equal signs. So that's something I constantly get wrong. It's very annoying.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think probably the same answer really. It's those sort of syntax sort of problems. It's often scarier when your code runs but doesn't do what you thought it would do, and you can't actually work out why it's doing what it's doing, let alone why it's not doing what you thought it should do. So it's those sort of problems that are fairly common, and yeah, trying to remember different functions and which way around they go. And I always get some of the tidyverse functions the wrong way around constantly. Like rename, it's just not logical to me. I get it wrong all the time.
Yeah.
So it's just those sort of syntax issues that are the biggest problems.
I think one of the ways I tend to get around it, and I don't know about you guys, but so I use Visual Studio Code. I know a lot of people use RStudio or similar for R, but I find having syntax highlighting on can be really helpful. And I think trying to stick to a sort of style guide, so using like the tidyverse style guide or and using a package like linter or styler to make sure your code meets those style guides can make it really easy to spot when you're missing something, because you go, hang on a second, the brackets don't line up. And you'll be able to kind of work out where your missing thing is from there. So I think that's one of the ways to kind of overcome it, is to be neat and tidy with your code and use these style guides. And it can be quite tedious, and particularly when you want to build something in a hurry, and the fun bit's always the problem solving and the building it, not the writing out brackets and commas and stuff. But it pays dividends in the future when you try and run your code and you're like, yes, the issue is that bracket there because it's not there, rather than, oh no, which of these 10 functions has a missing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that leads nicely on to the next question about where do you go for help or solutions. So maybe Matt.
Mr. Google is our friend, and And I mean, there's no problem you run into that no one else has ever come across before, or very rarely. I think there's a problem that you'll come across. There's something entirely new. So there is help out there. Obviously, Stack Overflow is one place people go to. Sometimes I don't find the solutions I want there, but yeah, just Googling it usually finds, if not a solution, then something that explains what's going on a little bit. That's my go-to.
Yeah, I mean, I come in there. I think like one of the things when you're a beginner that can be difficult is knowing what to Google. And yeah, Samrat Pawar, who is at Imperial College, he used to teach his students to like learn to Google these problems. You don't know how to phrase even have the vocabulary to phrase the problem.
Yeah, I think for me that's been like one of the biggest things that I've learned, because I always feel like I don't really know R. I just know how to Google, like how to find the information. So yeah, I think that's the Googling and knowing how to phrase it. Like, what are you actually trying to do? Yeah, like just to give like one example, earlier today, like my student is trying to code like forest plot for her meta-analysis, and we were getting really stuck at how to like make it a bit more compressed, as we kept calling it, like compress the forest plot. But obviously if you Google that, you get all this stuff about compressing the image, and that was not what we were looking for at all. And I was like, oh, maybe it's like the lines. And we eventually worked out we had to Google it in a different way to make sure that we were referring to how do we limit the spaces between the points, you know, so it's that sort of thing that can get confusing if you don't know how to Google.
You really have to have like an understanding of what's going on under the bonnet kind of thing to be able to figure out what might be causing that problem. And
I think as well, one of the things that I've found is the error messages that you get can sometimes be really cryptic, but they're often quite helpful. Especially if you're using sort of an IDE or similar, it will often tell you which line the error is. And what I'd say with that is a lot of the time, actually, the error's just before that, where you're missing something or it's running off. So that I think is a really handy one, is read the error message. Don't be scared because it's a bunch of technical stuff that you don't understand. Often it's something really silly, like it will say unexpected word in line, whatever. Actually, if you look, your problem is probably just before that, where you've not done something properly, which is why the unexpected thing is happening, because the compiler expects to find a bracket or a comma or a space or whatever between what you're doing and the next thing. And I think, you know,
can I come in?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'll put a counter question. So you're someone you were a professional coder before, right?
So I've got a master's degree in computer science, and
so do you think you have
a bit of coding.
A unique advantage in interpreting those error messages?
Possibly. I would say that I did a lot of coding and then did my master's degree, rather than I did a master's degree to learn how to code. So so for me, I think a lot of it is just it's come out as, don't be scared of things, and just if you read it and Google it, it'll often tell you kind of what it means, or at least a lot of what the common problems is. I still think a lot of what I know about coding is, you know, you kind of, it's been very much a pick it up as you go along kind of thing. And as Kaitlyn said, you know, it sometimes you don't feel like you really know a language, you just know how to Google about the answer. And you know, I think you know, I know that I feel like that sometimes, and I know that I've got friends and colleagues who work sort of full time as developers, and they kind of spend a lot of their time using Google or other search tools to kind of find an answer. So Stack Overflow is great, and it's full of professional coders who have come across an error and are trying to fix it. And you know, I think the other thing is there's lots of really helpful resources out there for all the different languages you've got. So you know, if you're using an R package, look at the manual. It, generally speaking, people tend to be quite good at documenting what their functions do and how the argument should be presented for sort of web development, so JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. I tend to use the Mozilla Developer Network to find out what different tags and things do, or how to do some stuff. So there's all these different kind of tools and resources out there to get to grips with some of the things. And I think the big thing is, if you want to do something, you probably will be able to do it. You just kind of need to know how to Google and in what language. And there's lots of commonalities between languages. You know, I hadn't picked up R at all until I started looking at the Prisma 2020 flow diagram app. And that was the first encounter I had with R. So, you know, it can be, I guess I come at it from a point of view of probably being familiar with quite a lot of different languages, more so than a lot of people perhaps watching the conference, but I come across similar problems across all of them, and there's similar resources out there to help.
There's a really good book, online book called Something Like R for Graduate Students, and they have a chapter on troubleshooting common problems. And it's really good. It has like just a list of all the common problems you might find, and yeah, it's things like having a capital letter instead of a small letter, making sure that your object's in the right place and all that sort of stuff. So that's quite a useful resource, I think. Another place I go for help is often Twitter and Mastodon now, I suppose, as well. But yeah, there's always someone hanging around on Twitter who knows how to do something. So even if you don't know what the code is, you can describe what it is you want to do, and someone might be able to get you a little bit closer or all the way to the solution. So that's quite useful.
Yeah, you've done that for me on Twitter a lot of times. Yeah, just following that, I guess. Yeah, so I guess we talked about Stack Overflow a bit, and I've actually got a question that's coming from Claudia Cap on this. So she says, sometimes I feel like I am missing out on easy solutions for specific problems in data analysis for evidence synthesis. For example, problems with specific formats such as .ris. I feel like Stack Overflow is not actually the right place to ask a question for such a specific topic. Where do you find support and information for such specific issues? Who do you ask when you're stuck? Maybe Kaitlyn?
I mean, I don't want to just say Google again, but that is what I tend to do. But I think, you know, obviously there's a whole community of people as part of this conference who would have some expertise. So maybe, I don't know, if like going forward, like maybe we should try and use like ourselves as a resource a little bit more to help each other out in the evidence synthesis space, because we all know something about evidence synthesis and are trying to solve you know, some of our issues with R. So yeah, I haven't really like done that so far, but we should do that. I would say.
Yeah, I think for some of the really specific issues, it can be really helpful to ask the community. The other thing is kind of, you know, we keep saying Google, but, you know, if you search things like GitHub and stuff, you might have other projects working on similar things where people have come across specific issues. I know when I've like been bashing my head against the brick wall trying to solve a problem, and I've searched for kind of what the issue is, and a lot of the time it'll be a thing that's present in other projects, and they'll talk about it. And sometimes it can be as simple as, oh, you're trying to use something that's actually in the newer version of your dependency, and have you updated your dependency, and other things you know, can be just picked up from, you know, the issues section of various projects if they've come across bugs. But I think that, yeah, you know, Stack Overflow can be great, but I think you're right that for really niche questions about really specific things, it maybe isn't the right space for those questions, and that's where Twitter, Mastodon, and the Slack and this conference can be really helpful with the networking, because you've kind of got those people that you can kind of phone a friend about.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to guess what this question is maybe it's talking specifically around librarianship information specialist type issues. So like there's bibliography, and I guess maybe there isn't the equivalent. I don't know, maybe there is space. For
There's
those
a
conversations, yeah?
I can tell you that there's a medical libralians Discord that seems quite active.
Okay.
So there's loads of spaces that exist.
Well, can we put? Yeah. Well, can we share? Can you share a link to that?
I'm sure I
That
will
sounds
try
really
and find
helpful.
it. It was somewhere on Twitter once, so I'll try and find the
Yeah.
link to that.
I'll dig around as well. Matt, do you know of any other such spaces?
No, but yeah, I can echo really what Kaitlyn said, that we are a community. The ESMARConf has a large community now. It's increasing every year. If you were to send an email off to one of us, I'm sure we could actually, if we don't know the answer, we could work out, one, who might know the answer, and two, we can probably work out the code. So it's just ask if you have a problem with any of these sort of things. We probably all come across the same problem, so, and solved it 8 million different ways as well. So there's not just one solution. I think some people don't really sort of realize or understand that in R there isn't one solution to any of the problems. There's often like multiple solutions, and they're equally as valid. So we can find solutions for you that will work for you.
Okay, I'll move on. I've had another question come in, and yeah, it's just going back to sort of Matt had introduced one book, a result for learning R. So, what book would you suggest for anyone to learn R who knows Python and intermediate?
Can I be controversial?
Ooh.
And say, you know, if you already know a programming language, a lot of the fundamentals are very similar, and it's the weird syntaxy stuff that can kind of get sort of trip you up and things. So I found the best way to pick up R was actually just get stuck in to a project I found interesting and try and solve the problems, and a bit of learn by doing. The great thing about this, slightly different to sort of, I guess, my day job as a paramedic, is, you know, if things go wrong on your local copy of the code, it doesn't really matter. You can kind of go back and test it and try again. So one of the ways that I've found really helpful, particularly as someone who kind of already has a familiarity with a variety of languages, is being just kind of getting stuck in, finding a project I found interesting, cloning it, making some changes, adding a feature that I thought would be helpful, and that was how I got to grips with the R syntax and stuff, because the basics are very similar. You know, R has, you know, lets you install packages in the same way that you can in Python with pip, and you just need to kind of get to grips with some of the different syntaxes, but the actual way that you'll solve problems still falls back to, you know, see if someone's got a package that does it. If not, you know, fall back to your basic logic statements and try and get it done. So yes, there are some really helpful R books out there. I wouldn't personally know of any because I've not used any. But sometimes just getting stuck in can be a good way of learning.
Okay.
There's a vignette in the Reticulate R package that actually looks at the difference between Python and R from an R user's point of view, but I think it's probably equally as good from the Python user's point of view. So it just tells you what those main differences are: the difference in indexing from 0 or 1, the difference in different syntax. So it's quite a useful little, short page vignette to understand the differences.
Yeah. Would you mind? Do you have a link to that? You can pop in the chat. Cheers. I'll distract everyone else while you're looking for that. Okay.
I think I've got it. I'll
Okay.
send it to you, Matt.
Great, thanks. Okay, so right, do you have any practices or tips to make coding more efficient or streamlined, to make it easier to, instead of solving the problems, avoiding them in the first place?
work with other people.
Yeah.
That's the biggest tip is I think working in teams really helps because everyone has a little bit of different skill set. Yeah, and you learn a lot from working with other people. So you learn how to overcome some of these barriers, and hopefully they might learn something from you. Not usually in my case, but I'm not a very good coder. But I think there's something to be said to be working and collaborating in teams.
That's a good comment.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Matt's saying, and also for me, I also just find it really useful, like looking through other people's code, because like line by line, trying to understand the way that they've solved a problem massively helps me, because I feel like when I started learning R, I sort of dived into it and I learned the tidyverse, and then I didn't understand any of the base R stuff. So looking at the way that different people solve a problem, either working with them or even just going through their code on GitHub and trying to understand their thought processes, for some reason that's actually where I learn the most new code from and new solutions. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, I think working with other people in collaboration is really good. I think another thing for me is, set up your coding environment, and by that I mean so as I said, I use Visual Studio Code, but others use RStudio. Don't just go with the defaults. Play around with the settings and stuff until you find something that works for you. So for me, I'm a bit weird. I like coding on a black background with sort of other text. Other people might like coding on white background, black text. Little things like that can make all the difference to making it more efficient for you. I try and set up syntax highlighting for the languages that I use to make it so I'm not just staring at a screen. It makes it much more clear where I'm maybe missing a comma or things like that. And also, if you set these things up right, you can often just hover over the things you're typing and it'll tell you what that function does. And little things like that, if you've got that all in place, can be really helpful. So as I said, I find Visual Studio Code really good for that because it's relatively lightweight and works across loads of different languages. So I could pick up a JavaScript project and work on that, or an R project and work on that, and it'd be a very similar environment. But I think that the big thing is don't just settle with the defaults that the software designers have kind of thrown at you. Spend some time setting things up to look like how you like, to work in a way that you like, because that can make things much more streamlined moving forwards.
Yeah, and I guess related to that hardware, sometimes it's nice to have another screen. If you have the luxury, I guess, one screen for your help, like Googling, or one screen for your code. It does really speed things up. But it can be difficult, especially if you're having to move around and work in different places and cafes and whatnot. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna give priority to the questions coming in. So we've had one in from Shreya Dimmery, and that is going back to your own code months later. No amount of comments can help if the script is a complex project. A fair point, I think. What are your suggestions on commenting in a way where the code doesn't become a 2K line, like 2,000 lines of code, basically? There's a related question that I'll ask after.
I think. Sorry. I guess I feel like I'm maybe talking quite a lot, but for me, I like my code to be quite readable. So for that, I mean, I'll stick to, as I said earlier, a style guide, and that helps not just for finding syntax errors, but also for following your code in a logical manner. Because the way I look at it is, I shouldn't need to comment about my implementation of a function. That should kind of stand alone and be obvious about what it does. I might, if there's a strange glitch, for example, when you're doing something quite low level, you might need to comment and say why you're doing something strange. I don't know. But for the most part, I find that I don't tend to put comments within a function. I tend to have describe what the function does, and then hopefully, it's small enough that the the rest should kind of stand and be kind of obvious in and of itself. I think my tip with functions and splitting stuff out into functions is, one, don't be afraid of having some functions that you mark as sort of private or internal functions that are used by your package and that are subject to change and that aren't documented in the same way as your public functions, which should very rarely change in terms of their interface, not necessarily in terms of their implementation. And anything that you're going to do in multiple places in your code should probably be split out into its own function. So if you find yourself writing the same set of 5 lines of code several times throughout your project, that should probably be a function. And that's kind of how I tend to work with it. So again, I'll take the example of the Prisma 2020 app. We had something that was that was basically repeated several times in the code. I split that out into an internal function that could then be reused, and then it means that when you're adding and changing things, you've only got to change it in one place.
I think that's something that I've learned quite recently, is that using functions in a better way, but also naming things so that it makes sense of what the thing is doing, rather than just having Matt's function. It's what the function does, and having sensible names. This is sometimes hard, but having sensible names for the variable names. So I know that the variable is, for me, it's all about wildlife stuff, but maybe, harvest size or bag or whatever. But having something that is so that I know what the hell I'm talking about. And it's not easy, and it's not something that comes naturally, because you often have a data frame called df or dat, and that's not helpful to anyone, including yourself. But it takes a little while to learn that, I think, and it takes a little time. And I sort of echo what Chris is saying about the style. Using the styler is a revelation to me. So I've just started doing that recently, and it's really helped me read code better. It's a good tip.
So can we just clarify on the styler? For anyone who might, like me, who might never have heard of it.
It's an R package that you can run every time you make code changes. So sometimes even, I don't know if RStudio has integration with it, but you can even have your IDE run it live on your code, and it basically pops out things that aren't like errors in the same way that a compiler error is, but are like warnings that says, hang on, this line's too long, or you should always try and use consistent variable names. So for example, one of the things you might have it configured to do, and I think might be the default, is it prefers like alternating capital words rather than underscores, or vice versa, so that all your variables are consistently named, rather than like some might be snake case and some might be underscores.
I guess one of the tricky things with comments is knowing how far to go. Like, there's one thing describing what it does, but then should you also describe how? Who do I assume the audience is? What level of assumed knowledge? I think that's what can be tricky. Yeah. Maybe Kaitlyn has.
I was just gonna say it depends. I mean, it sort of depends like what project you're working on, because I think if you're trying to build a package, it's sort of a different question, because then you have to make sure that someone else can like actually understand what you've done and pick it up, or if you're working collaboratively with people. What I've found, if I'm working on something like to do with my research more, like if I'm doing, I don't know, like a meta-analysis or some analysis thing that I have to use a lot of code for, and I need to go back and actually understand what I did, I've actually found it really useful to use like R Markdown or something like that, and make it like an almost kind of narrative, like this is how I'm doing my analysis, and all the you can add things like bullet points and like go into a lot of detail about what you're actually doing conceptually and what all the variables mean. So I found that really useful if it's for like a specific analysis, and I think it looks much nicer as well than like having a million comments, so that when you go back, you're kind of more willing to read it all and understand it as well. So yeah, if it's for that sort of thing, that can be useful.
One of the times I'm just looking back at some of the utility functions I wrote for the Prisma app, and one of the times that I found I've specifically commented in a bit more detail about what the code's doing has been where I've had to sort of embed, for example, JavaScript within the R code. So there's less assumed knowledge of people understanding the function. So I've described in quite a bit of detail about what the JavaScript actually does. So I said like it loops through each node, locates this, does this and that, in a way that kind of reads a bit more than perhaps I would have done if it was just a simple loop written in R. So that can be another thing is, you know, if you're so R, you can, you know, particularly with things like Shiny and stuff, you might embed HTML or JavaScript within your code. In Python, I know you can embed, and I think you might even be able to in R embed stuff like C and other native code within your projects, and that might be a place where you do go into a bit more detail with the commenting, because the level of assumed knowledge is a bit less.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so what do you know now that you wished you knew when you started out as a coder? Might take a few minutes.
Oh, what do I know?
I think like for me, the biggest thing when I first started coding, I just like didn't understand all of the things that I could do with it. So I always feel like when you first like right at the beginning, I started learning coding when I was like final year of university, my undergrad degree, and they literally just gave you like not sentences, but functions to write out in R. Basically, that's what they gave you on a bit of paper, and I was just typing it in, and I didn't really understand what I was doing, and I just thought R was like something that you do like calculations in only. So I think I just had no idea about the capabilities and all the amazing things that you could do with it, and that you can, like anything you can think of that you might want to do or create even as an app, like there's so many options. And I think I didn't know all of that. So I always try and like whenever I'm working with people who don't know R, I'm always trying to get them excited and realize like it's not just like calculating a mean or whatever you're doing in this line of code. It can do so much more than that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that, and the fact that, you know, communities are really helpful, so people don't bite. So it can be, you know, don't feel like you're asking a silly question, because you're probably not. You might feel like, oh my god, they probably know this, it's really obvious, but actually it's not that. I think we've all been there where we've had to come up with a solution and gone, that was really obvious. I should have realized that. And actually, you know, sometimes it just takes a little sort of nudge in the right direction from someone. So don't be afraid to ask. And this is kind of showing my level of nerdiness, but one of the IRC channels I use occasionally. So IRC is like a very old text-based version of Slack, for want of a better term. But one of the IRC channels I use just has the tagline of "Don't ask to ask, just ask." And I think that's kind of stuck with me. It can be really helpful. And with that, I guess, just don't be afraid to delve into some of the dark corners of the internet where things like IRC and things like that exist. So IRC, for example, a lot of Linux and open source software has IRC channels. And it can sometimes be a bit sort of daunting accessing those kind of things, but for some of the more niche technical questions, there are lots of people with lots of quite detailed knowledge sort of on those, and they're more than happy to help if you do. So if you see a project and it says they've got an IRC channel or whatever, that can be a useful source of knowledge of actually people helping you solve your problem pretty quickly as well. You know, I've had people talk me through a problem, you know, and like less than an hour after asking the question, and that's quite a nice thing about the programming community.
I'm going to count. I'm going to let Matt come in, and then I'm going to ruffle things up again.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going some of those dark places in the internet, but yeah, I agree with both Kaitlyn and Chris about the whole sort of learning process and being open to understanding that R is not just a calculator. I think that's quite that's mind blowing once you realize that, but it takes a little while to get through there. For me, I think one of the things, the biggest thing is don't be afraid. You can't really break it. You know, you have to work very hard to break stuff in R. You have to, you can make a mess of stuff, but it's quite easy to sort of undo those messes. But also, one of the things I learned most at was you don't have to be a really good coder to start with to work on some of the open source projects and things. So, for example, the ES hackathons that we had in the past, working on some of the packages there that we've built. When we started Heavy Atlas in Stockholm in 2019, I think, I wasn't a coder at all, really. I knew how to turn the computer on and find R, and that was about it. I didn't know about GitHub or anything like that. There's a place for everyone of every different level of coding ability on these projects. So even if you are I say just is the wrong word, but it's just if you're helping with documentation, saying what the code you want the function does, you know, it's very easy to contribute in some way, and all those things need to be done. So it's useful, and then you learn loads from other people.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think sometimes when you're learning, some of these spaces can be, like you said, Chris, intimidating. And the conventions that exist within them, not intentionally, can seem standoffish and dismissive. Like, you know, oh, this issue has already been posted on Stack Overflow, and then it just gets shut down. So, I mean, yeah, I guess that's why I found this community a lot easier to solve problems with. And related to that, there's also an element of fear beginners and non-beginners sometimes feel about looking stupid and putting stuff out there on the internet. So I think there's also a space for like local communities are really important. Yeah. Anyway, anyone want to come in, Chris?
No, I agree. I think that, you know, it's good to have the variety of communities, and particularly for beginners with quite specialist needs, as we are in this evidence of this community. You know, it's good having our own space, but also it's good to not be afraid to venture out of that little space if there's something that perhaps the expertise within this community doesn't exist to answer that one question. You know, someone in a different field but trying to do something similar might well have encountered that problem, and also if you can't find a solution to how to solve it in R, someone might have solved it in another programming language. And actually, once you understand the logic behind what they're doing, implementing that in whatever language can be easier than not having any knowledge at all of where to even start.
We've had a question come in, which is actually the next question on my list anyway, pretty much. What tips or lessons do you have for someone like me who is learning to code and code in R? And the related question is like tips for aspiring new coders generally, I guess. But given this is an R conference, let's keep it R, people. Kaitlyn?
I think I would say when I was first learning, I did a lot of stuff on DataCamp, which is not always free, but some of the courses are free. And I also used Coursera. So like both of them, in both of those situations, I think in Coursera I had to like submit an assignment at the end of a course, and that was really useful. And in Data Camp, it's probably even better because you're actually like coding while you learn. So I found that just so useful. Like I'm not very good at reading, so I really hate it. Like I couldn't just read lots of documentation, and I know there's so many R books out there, and they are really useful for me when you have a specific thing and you read that chapter maybe. But for me, I learn a lot better by doing, and those Data Camp courses are great for that because you're just constantly coding and learning. So that's what I would say. That's how I learned basically, or how I started off, and then I just Googled from there.
I think a lot of those online courses can be great. One that I've sort of seen was the CS50 one from Harvard, the Introduction to Computer Science, and it starts at using quite low level concepts. So it goes through C and then Python. So it uses C for a lot of the low level concepts and then builds on that. But it gives you quite a good foundation. And again, you kind of code as you go and build a project at the end of it. And that's free unless you want a certificate, then it costs money. So again, that might be somewhere to start. And I would say find one that works for you. There's plenty of different people delivering plenty of different courses in different styles, and you know, if you find that you don't get on with one or it's not covering what you think it will cover, then try another one. I think I first started programming when I was about 13 using the C# for Dummies book, back when those were a thing and the internet was still on dial-up.
Yeah, I think it's important, like you just said, sort of be able to recognize when just something doesn't work for you. And often, like me, I'm sifting through rapidly different things, and then something just clicks, and I just bin off. I just stick with that one. And it's just being able to say to yourself, it's not because I am just not understanding it. It's just, you know, something about the way it's being taught just clicks with you. Maybe it's more visual or something. So try a few different things simultaneously and then pick the one that works for you.
I think another good tip is to have little pet projects that don't really matter. So there's you can try and challenge yourself to make yourself a website in R, or and you can, there's lots of help out there, so you can follow the help and you can follow it exactly. Then you can make tiny little changes, and there's little changes and see what happens. I think the Tidy Tuesday project is quite a cool thing because you get these data sets every week that you can play around with, and you can visualizations. Kaitlyn, your Shiny app things with the dogs, that was pretty cool as well. So it's that those sort of tiny projects that aren't for anyone but yourself. I think are quite cool ways to just sort of practice and learn, and then you'll find an error, and then you'll Google it, and you'll find out how to fix it, and then you learn a bit more, and every time. So yeah, just be nerdy and have some R projects that are just for you.
Yeah, I mean, sort of related to that, I think what I found especially when trying to make my code and data more reproducible and stuff, like learning that on a project which has a relatively simple analysis or something. When I first started learning, I was diving into a huge complicated project with loads of explanatory variables, loads of that, and it was really I was being thrown off. So if it's a much simpler project, that might be a better starting opportunity. But you also teach yourself as you push out a study and paper. Yeah, all right. And then I'm going to go with the ChatGPT question. To finish, I think, unless there's any other questions, please just throw them in. We've got a bit of time. So what do you think about using ChatGPT to help write code? And maybe ChatGPT in the context of coding and problem solving more generally. Fingers on the buzzers.
I think it's a really, really useful tool if you know what to ask it. So it's the same thing with Googling. It's just posh Googling, I suppose. Is that if it's helpful to a certain extent. So I've played around with it recently to help me troubleshoot a problem I have with a Shiny app, and it's really useful. But a lot of the time, it just gave you nonsense. So you had to ask the right questions. And then what was actually very useful is when you got an error message from the code that it had written, to say to it, "Oh, hang on a second, this is great, but this didn't work." And then it comes back and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, but try this." And you can learn quite a lot from it. So you can learn, how to deal with some of these issues, and it's quite good at that type of thing. But as I say, you need to know exactly what you're asking, and you can't just sort of copy and paste the code and hope it works for you.
I think and there's other similar tools to ChatGPT. GitHub released GitHub Copilot, for example, that's specifically for coding. I think it's complicated. I think one of the ethical issues is, for example, if you happen to have released your code under, for example, a GPL license, which requires all derivations to be made open source, does code derived from an AI-based machine learning model have to follow that license? Well, that's a complicated question, right? I think that it can be really handy. AI can, particularly boring repetitive tasks, or like writing out a boilerplate function that does something that's been done millions of times elsewhere but has to be slightly specific for your code. AI-based programming can be really helpful. It can help answer questions, but I think the big thing is you can't use it as a substitute for truly knowing the language and what the code does, because if you can't turn around, if your code, for example, to take a worst case scenario, causes, let's say, a massive memory leak because it starts looping and calculating using massive numbers and causes your computer to crash. You can't just say, well, it was the AI's fault. It's on you to kind of check your own code and make sure your code works. So it's not a substitute for knowing and understanding the language and good proper testing. But it can be a really valuable thing. So the way I can sometimes use sort of Copilot or ChatGPT is, I'll check that it kind of looks right before I'll agree, insert it into my code. So I will read through it. I will make sure it does what I want it to do before I start playing around with the with the actual outputs from that.
Yeah, I would agree with what both Matt and Chris have said. It is useful in certain contexts, and if you know exactly what question you're asking it, and you roughly know what you want to do and how R works and everything like that, and you just want to try and solve a specific problem or understand why you're getting a specific error, or how to do a specific thing in a plot, for example. I found it can be useful at things like that. What I've also used it for is some of the more boring aspects of writing code. Like for me, writing unit tests, actually, it can be good at that. Or I've recently trying to convert some of my Shiny apps into Shiny modules, and actually it's been coping really well with that, converting some of my Shiny app code into modules. Another thing I use it for is when I'm building a Shiny app or something like that, and I want to add in CSS or HTML code, because I know nothing about HTML, JavaScript, CSS. But if I want to do something simple, like change the color of this specific thing, or add an image in of this size, I can get it to write the HTML code that would work within our Shiny for that. So those are a few of the things that I've used it for. And yeah, I absolutely wouldn't trust it because it lies about so many things, but it can be useful.
Have you used it for translating between languages? Can I feed it? I've never touched ChatGPT. Could I feed it a function in R and it would output me an equivalent function?
Yeah, I think it would. I think if you said, because I have used it also for, I think I'd found an answer to something in Python. Like I think I was using a plotting library that they use in Python, and I was like, can I convert this to R code to solve this problem? And it did manage to do it correctly. So
I think you have to be familiar with the language that you're translating into and the problem that you're trying to solve for that to be in any way useful, just in case it gets it wrong.
Yeah.
So I would so say you knew Python, but you didn't know, I don't know, Ruby, then translating from Ruby to Python would probably be okay, but I wouldn't go with a Python that's translated to Ruby because I wouldn't be able to verify it as easily.
I used it for translating what I thought was a useful R function into JavaScript for Google Earth Engine, and it worked really well. I didn't have any sort of idea what would work in Google Earth Engine, but it plotted the thing I wanted to plot, so that worked.
And one other thing I've used it for, sorry, is like if you want to speed up your code as well, like if you're doing something in a really long way, if I've got loads of code to do one thing, I have asked it before, can you make this more efficient? And it has suggested things that I hadn't thought about.
I've used it for a very niche problem that I have, is translating my comments and my code into Norwegian comments and code, which is, something that none of you will probably have to do, but that's actually been really, really good.
Yeah, that can be really helpful. Yeah,
I mean, I guess
multi languages.
Yeah, we have people from all over the world in this conference, and it might be useful for translating some of those resources you suggested. I think Deep L is also an interesting one for translating. If that helps anyone. Anyway,
is that the Google one?
I don't think Deep L is Google. Well, that probably is. Most things in this world are. But yeah.
No, it's not. It's random German.
Yeah, that's quite. I mean, I've found that really useful more generally when collaborating with people in Latin America on emails, because you're often trying to communicate really technical things. And anyway, all this chat about ChatGPT might become irrelevant because there's this 6-month pause that Musk is behind now. It's like they're trying to. I think they're throwing a bit of a tantrum, but yeah, we'll leave that for another day. Okay, so I think that's about covers all the questions. I think actually trying to wrap this up somehow. I think the thing that stands out for me from the chat is sort of the importance of communities and having multiple at different scales. So, as ESMARConf, we should plug that, and the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon communities, follow those on Twitter and Mastodon, and there's lots of lovely people there who will help you out with your problems. And then I think, within your own institution, having perhaps more, little bit more private networks where you can ask different kinds of questions when you're really learning, I guess. And I think all of them are kind of important, and the main thing when learning and problem solving is to have access to a community. Or if you, all right. So thanks everyone. We're finishing a little bit early, but it's lunchtime, so that was really interesting. Well, lunchtime here really.
I suppose I just wanted to say one thing is, even if you don't feel like you know code, get stuck in. If there's a project you want to help on, or you've got an idea or whatever, just get stuck in. And even if it's as simple as testing it and writing a good quality bug report, saying exactly what you were doing when a problem happened, or you think that this package does everything great apart from this one little thing that's really niche in your area. If you can describe that in a way that's very easy to translate into code, so describe the project logically rather than vaguely, that can be really helpful, and can be a good way to start. A lot of people kind of get started by helping out writing tests or even writing documentation or use cases and similar can be just really helpful. And I'm thinking back to the site source package and how over the past year, I think a lot of, and a bit of a shame I wasn't able to be as involved as I'd wanted to with that, but seeing people sort of progress from perhaps being really not very confident in their own knowledge of the code, and then sort of getting to the point where committing bug fixes and making changes to code. It's really nice to see, and one of the benefits of being involved in a community.
Yeah, I think having a practical project to be involved with in sort of developing relationships with that community could be helpful in learning together. Any closing thoughts, or should we leave it there? Okay, I'm gonna leave it there, I think. All right, well, thanks everyone for your time. That was an interesting discussion. Yeah, be around.